Tánaiste Simon Harris has announced plans for a major overhaul of rural housing rules, describing it as the most significant change to planning policy in over 2 decades. The proposed reforms aim to ease restrictions on rural development, including rules around ribbon development and housing on family farm holdings, with the goal of making it easier for people with the social or economic need to build homes in the countryside. Now, these changes are expected to go before Cabinet early next month, and for more on this, we're joined by Joe Cooney. He is, of course, Clare Fine Gael TD, and Garry Miley, who lives in Ogonnelloe. He's an architect and lecturer at the Department of Architecture at the South East Technological University. Good morning to you both. Deputy Cooney, if I can start with yourself, maybe to get your take on this.
Thank you, Derrick. Good morning to everybody. Again, look, I welcome this move. First of all, I want to compliment the planning staff at Clare County Council on the fabulous, fantastic work they're doing. We're well aware there's an awful lot of rural applications going in where people in the rural countryside want to get planning permission. These young people, they would be actually having to pay fees of up to 8,000, give or take, to apply an agent, do all the planning duty that has to be done, get the planning application lodged, and most of these people and all these people, when they put in a planning application, would be hoping to get a grant to planning. The planning section have to work within guidelines, and as far as we're concerned, some of these guidelines are too strict, unfortunately, and we have some people that don't actually get planning and get refused plannings for certain reasons. Again, as I say, Clare County Council are probably granting maybe up to 90% of the planning applications that goes in, but we're trying to help those people, more so in the rural parts of the county, that find it hard to get planning, and that's why we're looking at the guidelines, to change the guidelines, to see can we help these people to get their planning application over the line. As you're well aware, Derrick, we have the local rural needs, we have ribbon development, with social and economical needs, with national and rural roads, and they have to try and meet all those guidelines within different parts of the county, and it don't be easy at times, and that's what we are looking at in government, to see how we can help them young people to get their planning applications over the line going forward.
Garry Miley, what's your view on this?
Hi Derrick, hi Joe. I think I sort of have mixed views on it, Derrick. On the one hand, at a personal level, I sort of have, I welcome the idea that people should be allowed to live in whatever part of the world they want to live in, and I think we should be able to facilitate people who come from rural Ireland to be able to continue to live that way and to, pass down to next generations, what might be a homestead, that kind of thing. It's important for the fabric of society. On the other hand, I think we have to wait and see how the guidelines are actually worded, because we have to remember that the reason why we have these kind of tricky or difficult planning guidelines is because when Dick Roche brought them in 2005, the intention was to make it easier, or to ensure that people who live in rural areas should be able to get planning permission for a house. And of course, we all know 20 years later that that's exactly not what happened, that the guidelines were written too loosely, the local authorities interpret them a particular way. We also had input from Europe and so on, and we ended up with this terrible mess that we've got now. So I think it's very easy to make a sort of a banner statement and say, look, we're going to drop these regulations, we're going to change everything. But until we see the actual document in front of our noses that says what the new regime is going to be like, I mean, my experience of looking at how the Irish government deals with planning issues would tell me that, until we actually see the nitty-gritty and we can actually read we can actually read the new guidelines, we can expect the law of unintended consequences.
And Joe, on that point, those unintended consequences that Garry speaks of, and maybe the little offshoots that maybe we haven't just thought of quite yet, I suppose it's not going to be a linear thing at the same time.
Well, look, I see where Garry is coming from. He mentioned the word we're in a terrible mess. Again, there's a lot of planning applications granted, but there is criteria out there that's preventing people from getting planning. I could go into a number of cases that I'm aware of. I won't go into them, but one is the local rural needs and where you're allowed to move in the local rural area. They are two big issues. I'm aware of a family in a rural village in West Clare where there's no infrastructure to build houses within the village. The family, their parents before them have a farmland outside of the settlement of that village, and they're not allowed. They're looking for a house to build in the area. There's no house to get within the village, and they're not allowed to move outside the settlement, and they're having the farming land there for years. That don't make sense. There's issues like that that's causing serious problems. I'm also aware of another family back in the West Clare area. They had 200 acres of land, and one of the family members had to go and buy a site in another location because he wasn't allowed to build on his own land because it was going out onto a national road, which don't make sense. And issues like that need to be looked at, need to be sorted, and make it easier for people. And a third one, I'll just go to Derrick. I'm aware of families that own land in rural areas. They moved into urban areas maybe back 15, 20 years ago, whenever the case may be. Now their young sons and daughters want to come back to the rural area to build houses, but because they were born in urban areas, they're not allowed to move back to build on those lands. And again, that's another issue. We should be encouraging people to come into the rural areas rather than trying to encourage them to go into urban areas. That's what I'll be looking at, and that's what I'll be doing going forward. And hopefully with these new guidelines, and that we'll be looking at in July, and hopefully we'll get them through legislation that will help more people in the rural parts to build houses in the rural parts, which we're crying out for schools, for GA clubs, as you're well aware yourself back in West Clare. There's some GA clubs there, and they're struggling with numbers and school numbers, and we don't have the infrastructure in the villages to build the houses in the villages, and if we don't, then we've no choice, only build them in the rural parts.
And I suppose, Garry, wastewater treatment and all that goes with it has been a huge topic around a lot of this, maybe in terms of the bigger developments. But for these one-off houses, if it's their own percolation or whatever it might be, is that something that will be considered?
Yeah, well, my understanding of it, actually, all I know about it now is what I heard the Simon Harris, what was reported in the newspaper Simon Harris said the other day. So I'm presuming that there'd be a sort of a laxity with regard to things like ribbon development and development in backland areas, but other things would continue to apply. So that, for example, if you're going to build a house on any site, well, yes, of course, your septic tank would still have to work, and you'll still have to be able to prove that you can get in and out onto the road safely. So none of those, if I understand it correctly, those kind of requirements won't be dropped, which is fine. I think we all understand that. Nobody wants a free-for-all. So it's not as if we're saying, if I understand it correctly, I don't think the government is actually suggesting that we're going to be moving to a situation where anybody can build anything anywhere. That's my understanding anyway.
And Joe, on that, I think the wording around it was something to the effect of that anybody who has a social or economic need will have a reasonable expectation of getting planning permission. So that does sound like language that would suggest that it will be that little bit easier.
Well, yes, it will be that bit easier, but there'll be still guidelines there to be made. The likes of the sight lines on the road, the likes of percolation tests, those guidelines are not going to change. The speed limits are actually coming down, so the sight lines measurements will vary a bit because of the speed limits coming down on all roads, which we're well aware, as has happened on rural roads already. It's going to happen on regional roads and the national roads. That's going to happen as well going forward. It will make it easier, but we still have to look at where sons and daughters are allowed to build on their own land holding. And that is vital and important. And unfortunately, that's not happening at the moment. That needs to be looked at. The other thing, the ribbon development. We want to get clarification exactly on what ribbon development is. There's no full clarification. It's up to and including, but there's no proper figures. So we'll be putting proper figures on ribbon development. And ribbon development in some areas, it's hard to get sites in some rural parts, and you might have no choice in only stay and call the ribbon development. Is it into the world out in rural Ireland? I don't think it is, to be honest with you, and that's another guideline we'll be looking at. And the most important one is the local rural person to see if they can be allowed, if they can't get sites in a certain area, they have to buy a site to see what distance they can be allowed to move from A to B. At the moment, it's 10 kilometres and 10 kilometres only, which is very limited because we're well aware a lot of the good sites Derrick have been built on, and as Garry rightly said there, to meet sightlines, meet percolation tests and that. Not easy to get sites to meet those. So we'd be looking maybe to extending that up to 15, 20 kilometres to make it easier for those people to look around, to search and to buy sites in the rural countryside.
I suppose, Gary, if these proposals are passed, it'll take a little bit of getting used to, I'd imagine, even from a planning perspective, because we know that the restrictions on one-off housings were kind of designed to maybe prevent sprawl as such. So it'll be a mindset shift as much as anything else.
Yeah, well, Derek, I think it raises another concern. I think for all of us, maybe 90% of the people in County Clare listening this morning are kind of having a little bit of maybe a tiny little bit of a smile to themselves, thinking, great, that I'll be able to take care of my son or daughter, they'll have a house. My concern about it is it suits us this week, but this whole idea of the ministerial guideline, which was introduced in the Act in 2024, it's sort of giving the government in Dublin carte blanche to decide pretty much any kind of planning issue that we'd have around the country in rural Ireland, making decisions for people in County Clare. So this week, fair enough, it's to do with relaxing guidelines on one-off, what let's call it, I don't even like to use the term one-off houses, family houses. But what happens next week when there's a new ministerial statement brought in and it's to do with data centres or power generation units that will be suddenly, or wind farms, where we'll no longer have the ability to comment, influence, get involved in discussion about whether these can happen in our neighbourhoods or not. And this is I think this is the big issue here about this piece of legislation that came in 2024, is that the ministerial statement provision is centralising planning and putting all of the power and planning, almost carte blanche, into the hands of people in Dublin. And pretty soon we won't have any kind of say at all on the big issues. And I think that's a real concern. I think people should pay attention to that.
Joe, would you have anything to say back to that?
I can see where Gary is coming from, but we're all well aware at the moment we have a serious housing crisis in this country, and we in government are looking to know how we can improve people to get planning, be in urban areas or in rural areas. And in a lot of the urban areas, unfortunately, the lack of infrastructure is a big issue. And we can take a lot of rural villages, with 52 rural villages here in our own county that don't have the proper infrastructure. And that means in those 52 villages and towns, you cannot build houses within the settlement. And that's driving young people away from our areas. We have to try and see what we can do to see if we can help those young people. Then if we can build them with the village, within the village and town settlements, to try and help them to build in the rural areas. And then I can take Crawford and Clare. We are looking at trying to get a pilot scheme into them two villages, probably about for the last 10 years, but more so over the last 3 or 4 years when the Minister approved 2 pilot schemes. I'm still working on it, and I've asked the question during the week, is it possible that we could see these pilot schemes started within the lifetime of this government? And I've been nearly told highly unlikely. So that means that we won't have those pilot schemes up and running in the next 3 years, and just take the people in those 2 areas alone, Crawford and Clare, where are they going to live? They just have to move away, move into Innis, move into Limerick, move down to Galway, wherever the case may be. We can't keep allowing that happening in our rural parts of our county. And since I got elected as a TD, that's something I've been working very hard on, trying to get the infrastructure into them areas and trying to make it easier for the people that unfortunately can't move into the villages and towns to allow them to build in the countrysides.
Joe, I think there's a lot of people in both those areas that you mentioned that will be quite disappointed to hear that said this morning, that in the lifetime of this government we won't get those pilot schemes, because there had been very positive noises made about them, and I think a lot of people were expecting that they may see some fruition on it.
Well, we'll be hoping to see shovels in the ground over the next couple of years, but I've been told there was a meeting actually being held this week between the department with the local authority here in Clare, and I must compliment the local authority here in Clare who done fabulous, fantastic work driving on those 2 schemes, because there's 7 more of them around the county and we're the only one that's making progress, and that's much to the help of the Clare County Council. But this meeting was taking place this week between the department, between the local authority and Ishgaven, and there is, as we're all well aware, costs have increased an awful lot over the last number of years. Now the cost of these schemes going forward is going to be way bigger than what the funding was approved back 3 years ago. But that's something that's been looked at. We are driving on the schemes. Hopefully they'll start sooner than later. But again, my belief is taking it step by step is all going to take time, unfortunately. But don't be for the want of driving them on. But that's the information I'm getting back, and that is actually very, very disappointing. Like what you have to say, Derrick, for those people in the Cooley, Clare and Bradford areas.
Yeah, certainly is. Just a final point on this, Garry, to wrap up on it, I suppose, in a societal sense, any move to maybe get rural Ireland populated and buzzing and going, and maybe the auxiliary services that could come with it in terms of more people in the local school and the various other services that might entice, I suppose it is a positive step in that direction.
Yeah, Derrick, it is. I share most of Joe's view. I mean, Joe is obviously a very passionate advocate for rural Ireland, not just in Clare but elsewhere. But I mean, he's pointed to the problem, which is the time it takes to deliver, and that is, that's a government problem, and it has always been for the past 40 years that I've been following this. The problem has been the government's inability to put legislation, guidelines and structures in place to deliver things that are required at the time that they're required. And that is the problem. It's not the will. It's not Joe's good feeling. It's not my good feeling. It's our inability to be able to deliver on things. And this is my concern. I don't think the government has shown any kind of indication, that this new government even, that it's more willing or even better prepared to do what needs to be done with the planning system to make things happen faster where they need to happen. And all in the world isn't going to change that. They have to change their attitude, bring in better people, better minds, and have a sharper focus on what needs to be done.
Yeah, certainly one to keep an eye on.
Derrick, I just want to show Garry, we're working very, very hard to try and make more houses available for our young people in this county, in this country, and we'll continue to do it, and hopefully we'll be able to speed up the process of doing that with the great work that's been done at government level at the moment.
Absolutely, yep. We'll have to leave it there for this morning to Joe Cooney, Clare Fine Gael TD, and Garry Miley, who's an architect and lecturer at the Department of Architecture in the South East Technological University. Thank you both for your time this morning.